Okay, let's bring in Katie Zachariah, Republican strategist who knows an awful lot about what China is probably thinking, what Xi is thinking, as we await some more details or readout on this phone call happening right now. I want to ask you what you're hoping to learn from this phone call, what you expect as we are waiting for some kind of signs of a trade deal.
Well, first of all, it's so nice to see President Trump really and Xi Jinping, quite frankly, engaging in conversations. With regard to TikTok, what were we going to do if we were going to ban TikTok? In order to accomplish this deal, President Trump has now brought it to Xi Jinping and is going to allow American investors to take over TikTok so we're able to regulate it and it's not a national security threat. Another thing I'd like to see would be a goodwill on China's part to perhaps show that they're willing to purchase the Boeing and follow through on their Boeing contract. In addition, China refines 90% of the rare earth minerals, and President Trump signed an executive order in March of 2025 this year on rare earth mineral acquisition for the United States and the national security threat that it is that with China refining all of it. So those three issues on top of dealing with the reciprocal tariffs is exactly what I'd like to see coming out of this call.
Okay, I want to talk about TikTok since you brought it up. The president says he's got buyers. He's got a framework of a deal. But a question that, Kevin O'Leary brought up, which I thought was interesting, is whether, I think we have some breaking news. So
let's bring in Peter Schweitzer from the Government Accountability Institute, somebody, full disclosure, I do some work with. Peter, you wrote about this in Blood Money, one of your many books. You were on this a couple of years ago, but it seems like now that Trump's in office, they're finally paying attention to us. Explain how this is working and the Chinese involvement.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important that President Trump is taking a strategic approach to the fentanyl crisis because Joe Biden thought it was just a health care issue. The bottom line is this is a Chinese operation. The drug cartels are the junior partners. The precursor chemicals, as about everybody now knows, come from China, but they're offloaded at the Port of Manzanillo in Mexico, which is run by a Chinese company. Those precursors are shipped up north where the DEA says 2,000 Chinese chemists happen to be who turn this into the deadly cocktail of fentanyl. The drug cartels then use pill presses that the Chinese have sold to them at cost to produce these pills, which are killing so many Americans. And then the money laundering aspect of it. The drug cartels 20 years ago used banks in Latin America. They're now using state-owned banks. So this is a strategic initiative by China to punish and damage the United States. And I applaud the Trump administration, not just this operation to unwind part of the money laundering aspect and the nature of it, but also the Trump approach on tariffs, which is saying you are going to pay a price. We're not the type of people who are going to do the same thing back to you, but you are going to pay a price with tariffs as long as you continue to put this poison in the United States.
Yeah, people always, they ask me, what does the Hunter Biden context mean? When they snuggle up with China and then the DEA was telling the Biden administration, hey, there's billions of dollars of drugs flowing into the country. You telling me there's not a tie and a connection here? I'm telling you, that you have highlighted, I could spend an hour on just this. It's so infuriating. But I want to transition to George Soros. There are some serious allegations. They're only allegations, but there's some thought that maybe RICO charges should be brought with some of the organizations tied to George Soros. Tell us about that.
Yeah, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent a lot of time studying this. RICO is a statute, was passed in 1970 to target organized crime and individuals who were financing and supporting criminal activity, because what was happening is they were arresting the guy on the street, but the guys that were behind it, that were organizing it and financing it, weren't getting arrested. So RICO was passed. It's been used in the past against the Aryan nations. It's been used against white supremacists in Mississippi. The National Organization of Women tried unsuccessfully to use it against pro-life groups. And what it comes down to is this. George Soros on the left, Elon Musk on the right, completely have the right to finance political activities. The question becomes, if you are funding organizations that are engaging in criminal conduct, violent criminal conduct. Think, for example, of the Los Angeles riots, some of the groups behind that. Think about the attacks on Tesla that have taken place. There was an attack down in Georgia in 2023 where they were throwing fire bombs and attacking cops at a place called Cop City. The organizations behind that were funded by funding networks like the Tides Foundation and the Open Society Foundation, which George Soros, of course, funds. So the question is, if they are funding organizations that are known to engage in criminal violent conduct, could they be charged under RICO? And I think there is a precedent there, and I think it's something that ought to be looked at by prosecutors. Because, again, we want to have a very strong conversation in America about the future of our country. We do not want wealthy individuals funding violent protesters that are tearing down our cities and that are harming law enforcement officers.
Yeah, look, it's about the most American thing you can do to protest your government, right? That's the First Amendment right. But when it tips over into violence, when you have pallets of bricks showing up, that is potentially something that is, something that leads to violence. Last word, I have just a few seconds.
Yeah, no, I think the bottom line is this is something that ought to be investigated. If it's not occurring, if there's no criminal conspiracy here, that's fine. But it ought to at least be looked at by lawyers who can ascertain what is going on. Because these protests, these violent protests, are highly organized and they are clearly well funded, Jason.
Yeah, it is clear. And they're not spontaneous the way so many of them are trying to suggest that they are when they show up with the same masks and the same information. Peter Schweitzer, thank you so much for joining us.
Joining me right now, House Affairs Committee member, Congressman Michael Lawler. Congressman, your reaction to the president's game plan?
I think the president is spot on. I've been saying this for years, that the cartels need to be treated as terrorist organizations, because that is exactly what they are. And he was right to designate them as such, and even far righter to take action, as we saw this week, striking at ships that were trafficking drugs. The fact is, over 100,000 Americans die on an annual basis from drug overdose, 70,000 of which is tied to fentanyl. And I introduced legislation just a few weeks ago to make it clear that anyone who traffics or deals fentanyl-laced products should be charged with murder, because that is exactly what they are seeking to do. They are attempting to kill Americans. And, you look at what we are dealing with around the globe when it comes to terrorism, the death toll that has piled up from the illegal and illicit trafficking of drugs is far greater than anything we've seen. And the fact is that these terrorist, narco-terrorist states like Venezuela and these terrorist organizations, these drug cartels, need to be treated as such. And I think the president is spot on in what he is doing, and I fully support it.
Congressman, what I love most, and there's a lot to love about this, and that is the stopping of China and the precursors. We've been telling them, they said they don't know anything about it. They'll do their best. What can they do? We know they know all about it. And now they lost a lot of money, and they know that we know how it's getting here. I love that, even though we're in a sensitive time with trade negotiations.
This is critical both in terms of combating that illicit drug trade between China and Mexico, as well as these other narco states in Central and South America. But moreover, Brian, it's also critical for the United States to take back control of the prescription drug precursor industry. China should not be in control of this. It is having a tremendous impact on cost here in America, both obviously in terms of prescription drug cost overall, but obviously the death toll that we have seen from this illicit drug trafficking and trade between China.
I also want to talk about what the president's taken action. What was it like for you to go back to D.C. and see the nation's capital cleaned up? And how do you feel about other Democratic governors and mayors who I guess don't want that type of crackdown on crime? How do you explain that mindset?
Look, Brian, the crime epidemic that we have seen across this country over the last few years is shameful. And it has nothing to do with law enforcement. They're not the ones that are not doing their jobs. It's the politicians that have enacted disastrous policies like cashless bail in New York and raised the age where 16 and 17-year-olds are using guns in the commission of a crime hired by gangs because they know they're going to get a slap on the wrist in family court rather than criminal court. When you look at the stats out of Washington, D.C., where only 1.7% of gun crimes that result in a conviction end up in jail time, there is a fundamental problem with how the law is being prosecuted in Washington, D.C. And so what the president is doing, along with the U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro, cracking down on crime, bringing in the National Guard, bringing about the FBI and ATF and DEA to crack down on the drug trafficking, the gang violence, cracking down on those that are using guns in the commission of a crime. That is exactly what needs to happen in every major city across this country. The use of the National Guard that many of my Democratic colleagues are decrying, they didn't seem to decry it when Kathy Hochul brought the National Guard into the MTA subway system because people were being burned alive on the subways and pushed in front of oncoming subway cars. Right. We need to make sure that every resource is used to support law enforcement, right. And it starts by changing the laws. Cashless bail in New York needs to be repealed. Criminals need to be prosecuted and they need to serve jail time, period.
Absolutely. 2/3 of the public say crime is a major problem in America, but the Democrats don't seem to want to read that poll. Congressman Mike Lawler, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
President Trump says something is happening in the Russia-Ukraine war. He's not saying what, but he says we will find out in the next few days. Meanwhile, the Russia-China alliance is growing tonight. Today, Russia's president called his Chinese counterpart a dear friend. Vladimir Putin saying Moscow's ties with Beijing are at their highest level ever. Correspondent Alex Hogan has details tonight.
Russia and China parading their growing partnership on the world stage.
Our close communication reflects the strategic nature of Russia-China relations, which are at an unprecedentedly high level.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is rolling out the red carpet in Beijing to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un arriving today in what will be a gathering of all three leaders in the same place for the first time. With Russia's war still underway in Ukraine, North Korea is supplying troops. China says it's neutral in the conflict, but is a major buyer of Russian oil and economic lifeline to the country hard hit by sanctions. And now, Russian President Vladimir Putin says the Trump administration is listening.
In contacts with the previous administration of President Joe Biden, we talked about this. No one wanted to hear us. Now we see this mutual understanding. It's noticeable.
Still, Putin today gave no indication of moving forward on negotiations with Ukraine.
He has a spokesman as of yesterday saying there was never any agreement to meet with Zelensky or to have a trilateral meeting. So promises made and then promises are not kept. That's been in a pattern of behavior here for months.
President Trump now hinting at the next update.
I think in the next few days you'll find out.
Will there be any consequences if there isn't some type of announcement of a meeting with President Putin and President Zelensky?
And what could
NATO today also calling for its members to remain realistic.
We cannot be naive about Russia. We cannot be naive about Vladimir Putin.
China will throw its largest ever military parade, showcasing its strength today at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. That's local time, which is just about 3 hours from now. Brett?
Alex Hogan in London. Alex, thanks.